Hello. So in this video, I want to discuss this notion that's been yo-yoing in my brain about the movement from literacy to participation. And I admit this is a metaphor, but I think it has some energetic aspects to it. So I was reading the other day pages from Mimesis by a scholar whose last name is Auerbach. And in this book, which the subtitle reads The Representation of Reality in the Western World, or something to that effect, I am paraphrasing. At any rate, he says in one of the pages, it might have been the epilogue, that he's operating on the assumption when he looks at these different epochs of history, the Middle Ages, the pre-Middle Ages, the post-Middle Ages, the 20th century, as he is delimiting these intervals of time and coming up with a few representative texts to stand for those intervals, and then saying, as he is charting what is developing from interval to interval to interval until he arrives at the 20th century, and as he says in the last sentence of his epilogue, he is writing in the 1940s. What he is claiming by this development is as a scientist in a laboratory works with said equipment and stares into the petri dish of who knows what. There's some theory about what it is in that circular petri dish, but he doesn't see it with his physical eyes. What he is trying to do is disabuse himself of all that he thinks is there in the petri dish by subduing what there is in there to a number of experiments through instruments that will take away, mostly. And as they are physically or mechanically taking away parts of the what is it in the petri dish, so too if he's being careful and following up and documenting his experiment as he is conducting it, he will come across many things about his presuppositions, his theoretical ground, that no longer match up with what remains in the petri dish. And then what he is supposed to do as a scientist is let those pieces of his theory go away until whatever is left in the petri dish is left in his theory. And that correspondence not only is a correspondence of structure, but it is a correspondence of meaning. Because he went from scratch to this final, or at least immediate, conclusion of correspondence. And then he can write it up and share his results, and those results will be replicated if done in a correspondingly rigorous way, and this by extension across laboratory to laboratory to laboratory will eventuate in a number of bloated theories being winnowed down to just the facts of what remains in the petri dish after all the mechanical intervention. And this precisely is the opposite of what Auerbach thinks he is doing by selecting these canonical texts for the several intervals of time up to the 20th century. What he thinks he is doing is taking more or less a random sample of rhetorical art and subduing it to the processes of an inquisitive mind that wants to participate in someone else's experience. And that is a very different thing from wanting to know what is out there or in, say, the petri dish. So that difference makes a difference to me, because it seems to me that literature and the process whereby one becomes literate, which is to say able to intervene in the canon, a sample, a paragraph, and intervene by means of a reading strategy, which is informed by predecessor books they've read, or certain desires they might bring to the text. Well, I want to identify with the main character, or I want to glean some wisdom for my life from these characters in a situation. Whatever the case may be that motivates someone to crack open a book, they're doing it in the context of their own literacy. And that literacy, to quote or paraphrase from The Origins and History of Consciousness by Erich Neumann, this is a gentleman that Dr. Peterson has quoted often. The transpersonal element, which is to say, person to person, we can share our individual readings of a text, compare, contrast, see what you saw that I did not see and what I saw that you did not see, and not like the scientist who is trying to chip away his theories so that he can file away the content of the petri dish so that fact can be aligned with theory. And that should strengthen our theory to make wider or longer term predictions for future mechanical interventions of said matter. People who compare their notes on stories or literature they have read do so to find common ground, often, it seems. What they're sharing is not so much, here are the facts in the text, or here is my whittled down, pared down, precise theory that corresponds to the text and as it were, a gilded framing of the book. My theory is the gilded framing of the book. Finally, I had to do so much work to get to this level. Rather, what they're swapping and sharing and making common ground out of is their responses to the text. And that response is not the same thing as the text. It's not in the same wheelhouse. So they're sharing their responses to the text. And what is a response to the text? Well, it could be, and comes from a book, the poem The Reader and the Text, or something like this. It's one of those books in the early days of the 20th century that jump-started close reading approaches to literary study or literary criticism, where you didn't want to ask yourself, what were the 100 years leading up to Goethe? Or what's the influence of the King James Bible on Shakespeare? you wanted to ask instead, all right, here I am with this paragraph, this poem, this situation these characters find themselves in. How about I stick around? How about I stick around? I will stick around and watch and listen and wait. I will be Estragon and Vladimir in Waiting for Godot, and I will wait line by line. I'll make surmises and suppositions. I might write them in the margin of the text, but I'll stick around these paragraphs and walk to the end of the sentence. And if someone that I'm reading with, or if I have in my mind's eye a past book that I've read that is informing my experience here and getting me excited about what this author might be doing in a familiar discourse and how is he using this character, I might just take my speculative scholarly coat off and drop it on the pond of that period and step over the end of the sentence and begin at the capital letter of the next without my scholarly covering, and enter more deeply into the text, as it were, with hard-earned naivete. Let's see what happens next. I'm participating in this. Well, if you do that long enough, if you sustain that attention for a while in the text, then you find yourself replete. You find your pockets heavy, your backpack pulling you down with all this information generated by your experience then and there, literally between the lines and not outside the book. And you might stop, not go to the top of the mountain of this particular text, because you can camp out near the base with all this information in your pockets and backpack. And, oh, look, way over there on that 7th or 8th period, there's your scholarly coat, but you don't need it. Let's just make a little fire of interest and put up our tent of my own response and bring my attitude to this illuminating, what is it in the backpack? Well, it's a bunch of leaves that I haven't seen before and entrances of insects and agents with their familiarity and unfamiliarity to the surrounding. What is this use of time in this book? For instance, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. What is she doing with all her digressions? And once I've put 5 or 7 digressions in my backpack, I am done. We're not going to finish this book. I might just spend the next year on the 3rd digression and ask myself, is this what the modernists are talking about? Is this the canon of the 20th century, this 3rd digression on page 45? Whether it is or it isn't, I am dealing directly with my response, one way or another. This is close reading. This is reader response theory. How to convert that advantage, because I believe it is an advantage, and then I'll wrap up this video, of, well, I want to wear the coat of the scholar, to, well, I'll put that over the pond, over that little puddle. I should have said puddle, not pond. And be myself, sentence by sentence, and accept what finds its way into my backpack. My interest, in other words, for now. And make camp with it. That already is progress from wanting to be somebody else, wanting to be an expert, quote unquote. Because what is an expert? An expert is someone whose response you can predict because it will be the closest thing to knowledge. But there's a sacrifice in making that claim. And the sacrifice is you take the ski lift to the top of the mountain. You don't trek up yourself. And yes, you gain time, and you certainly will come down the mountain, and you will do the right thing. You will ski at a mountain resort for skiers. But what you won't have is the time you could have had. And that existential pinch is what makes value valuable. And it's where you begin to notice that you have skin in the game, and that what you do and what you do not do matters. And so you ask, upon reflection, all right, I am willing to make camp with these discoveries. What next? I can't live this way forever. It sounds quite solitary and individualistic and limits the scope of what I can know in this world. And right, true. You would know more than if you pretended to be someone else, but you will know less than what you could know if you did not go further. So, what does it mean, and what does it look like, and how does it feel to go further? I think that is the movement from literate to participant. And I'm punning because the words sound similar. They're almost homophones, although they are not. They certainly are not homonyms, but, or yet. What do I mean? Well, when the Gutenberg press made mass literacy possible through the mechanical intervention of movable type, the collective eye went from scanning the page and seeing the page as a place of where the facts congregate and where you can make relationships between facts, such as a drawing in the margin, a stylistic flourish at the end of a sentence, and the interaction of these marginal stories to the center piece. All of that fact mattering taking place on the page for the eye of the reader, the eyes of the reader to scan, or what was more common, for the ears of the auditor, of the audience, to receive from a skilled reader who would perform, P-E-R, forma, who would take the form on the page with its interrelated relationships and choose how to, and through that selection process, perform the text so that in all its visual complexity, it could be received through the ears as auditory complexity. All of that attention focus was redirected to the Gutenberg press. That is to say, the moment the machine was made that could generate and regenerate and iterate and reiterate the pages of the same text, the eye moves from the text to the machine that generates the texts. Because, wow, on the left side of the machine, there was nothing except blank pages. To the right of the machine, after all the movable type, we have Dante's Inferno. From the left, bricks. To the right, the tower. And it makes my eyes not want to look to the left or to the right, but just straight at the machine. To the point where the machine becomes a vanishing point in every portrait of epistemology, such that no matter what I'm acquiring as a concept, there looms the machine that put it together for me. And whether I call this machine my mind, the collective unconscious, the Gutenberg press, IQ, whatever name you want to give to it, the theory that is harnessing these facts is not being whittled down. It's being inflated because it populates everywhere. Wherever I go, well, there's a machine that can do that a little bit better, cutting corners. Yeah, it can make a house. Yeah, it can take out those noisy pixels and clean up that image. Yeah, it'll just photocopy your text. In a split second, farewell to the lighthouse with your many digressions. Farewell, cosmic encyclopedias. We have transparent efficiency. We have movable type. So that generated the after effect of mass literacy, which I think is good, because as the machine outpours, you have to have technical manuals to know what gears to turn and when, and think of sound mastering in vinyl and CDs. All the engineering feats come at the cost of more and more vanishing points for the machine. Now, while that makes accessibility to the page as the place of the relationships between symbols fecund, it's proliferated. Now I don't need someone to read it to me. I can just, well, here it is. Move my forefinger across the mouse and, oh, the mouse found its cheese. It found it in Google, in the search engine. And there, ChatGPT is putting it all up in these quick paragraphs for me. It's fine. But now the deficit seems to be not, am I literate? Can I read? And it's not, do I code? Am I a programmer? But with this strong arm of the literate, what becomes of the other hand? And does it know what the literate hand is doing? That is to say, what about the side of life that isn't about cutting corners, relating symbols, but is the space between the symbols being related. It's that moment of time when you move one foot forward to take a step and begin or continue walking. What about all that time? I've never cut a corner taking a step, although I have. I recently invested in arch supports for my feet, and I've noticed it has changed the way I walk. It's changed the way the muscles on the back of my neck feel. They're being activated as they were not being activated before. So in a sense, all that time of stepping with my feet has been intervened by the arch support. And the Gutenberg press intervened for our relationship with how symbols interact, whether it's on the page, in the ear, as performed, or mass replicated. But now, I think there has to be an awareness of the intervention by which our participation in the common things of life, whether it's having dinner, walking, going to church, performing mathematics, accepting a wage, doing jobs, meeting commitments. All these things now are ripe for the picking and can be intervened by that part of us which wants to be exercised. Because just as, wow, now I can read the Bible by myself via the Gutenberg printing press, so too there's something in our soul that can participate in the energies of this life. By what? By a Gutenberg printing press? What's the analogy? Well, I think it is I'll just say it. I think it is orthodoxy. I think it is the tradition of the church in its manifold graces and inner complexity, that all you have to do is pull the string from one side of, and rather than it unraveling, it gently pulls you in more. And it might take 2 years, it might take 4 years, it might take 2 weeks, but it is the journey. And it never lets up. And it's never withering. I'll put it that way. Okay, that's a 28-minute video. Some thoughts, random thoughts. Hopefully not randomly arranged. Have a good day.